Victorian house near the Virginia Museum on the boulevard. It may or may not be true that David climbed the water tower next to Huguenot High School, utilizing it as a blank canvas. Known for his portraits, I have one of the originals done in 1970 in art class on a piece of pantyhose cardboard. David?
My kind of man.
Luque, thank you so much. The weird thing is that I've known Luque going on for like 58 years, which is crazy. We both went to Huguenot High School when back in its prime, and so Luque was always in like the smart kid, advanced classes, and I was kind of on the periphery of. We kind of circled around each other, but we did know each other. And here's a strange factoid that probably nobody knows, and I didn't even tell Luque, but when I was in high school, maybe junior, I had done a lot of art things. I was art murals chairman and editor of the art magazine. And so somebody in this group heard about that and said there's this kid that likes painting and drawing, and so actually you invited me to join Bon Air Artist Association, which I did. So believe it or not, I'm still a member. Do I have to pay back dues?
Yeah.
She said yes, but maybe I'm former member. But I appreciate the invitation here. I was wondering what I was going to say that could be relevant to a bunch of artists who have been artists for quite a while. I've talked a lot to, groups, high school groups, and people that weren't artists, so I was wondering what could be relevant to you guys. And the only thing I could think was, I'm going to go through some of my story and how I got to where I am. And you might relay that to any, kids or grandkids or great-grandkids or, great-great-grandkids. So, because there's artists always coming up. So one question is, how did a little kid who grew up in a family, my dad was in a rival church right down the road here. I guess you call it that. Not really, but Bon Air Baptist, my dad was the minister there. So I grew up in Oxford and right around here. And so how does a little kid like that turn into an artist? And my parents knew really nothing about art, but they did a couple of things early on that I think was really helped me out. Number one, they got me a sketchbook. This is your sketchbook. You can draw anything you want to in it. It's all yours. That made me feel very special, and it's something that I've continued, and I think all of you guys, probably have too. I bought some sketchbooks that I have sitting around. It just shows, I have, hundreds of sketchbooks like this, where, my parents just encouraged me, any ideas I have, anything you want to draw, just draw it. Nobody cares what you put in there. So, I think that's a good idea, to encourage young artists to do that, give them something special. Another thing my parents did was got me a book. Since they knew nothing about art, it was by John Nagy. Has anybody ever heard of that? So, yeah.
Excuse me, I would be with my grandmother. Every time I went to see my grandmother, we would watch John Nagy, and that's where I learned.
Yeah, that's crazy. He also had a book that my parents got, and so I was fascinated with that, looking through the book, doing drawings from that, and so that kind of got me started. when I was a kid, I was much more interested and much more focused on drawing than I suppose you could say academia. It's probably a common theme throughout my earlier life, a very sort of lackluster career in academia, because I was just not that interested. I was more interested in goofing around, playing, and doing art stuff. But, oh, John Navy, yes. So once I got to high school, then I was kind of an odd mixture, because I was kind of like a frat boy in high school, kind of goofing around in that vicinity. And so I wasn't really interested in normal high school things like Lou Gay was, I'm sure. And I know that when I graduated from high school, I was pretty proud of having a pretty solid, well, maybe a low C average. To me, that was called success. I don't know if my parents exactly agreed with that, but I had some big shoes to fill, because I had an older brother, Brother Bob, and he was a typical firstborn, because he ended up going to UVA and law school and all that kind of stuff. And then they had this second kid who was not that interested in, those kind of matters. So, but I was interested in the arts. And so when we were trying to decide what kind of school to go to, because of course a kid would go to college when they got out of high school, my options were much fewer than Brother Bob. So I didn't really have the option of applying to schools. Like, where'd you go to school, Lou Gay? Yeah, see. That was not on the option spectrum for me. So my dad was very concerned about what's my son going to do. So he did some research, and he found 3 schools that he thought would be an option. One was University of South Carolina, who had a really good art school. One was called Ringling School of the Arts in Sarasota, Florida. And then, of course, there was VCU. So my dad planned this trip one time near the end of my senior year. So we jumped in the car and we drove down, and he had lined up for me and them to meet with the deans of the art school at University of South Carolina and at Sarasota, Ringling School. And I can look back and remember at one point, I guess I wasn't as excited about it as my father thought I should have been. And so we were sitting in this room with the dean, and my dad says, "Dave, don't you have any questions for the dean?" Which kind of, threw me into a little bit of a shock, and I couldn't really think of anything, but I said I liked this school, and that was it. So the next section of this talk is called "The Dumbest Reason Ever for Choosing VCU Art School." The dumbest reason ever for choosing VCU Art School. So I got back and pondered everything I'd seen, and wasn't really that comfortable, didn't know anybody like, most kids, but I was much more used to hanging out in the McDonald's parking lot on Forest Hill, like Friday and Saturday nights with my buddies, sitting in the back seat of whatever car we ended up in and drinking 3-2 beer, which was legal at that time. So that's what my existence and social life kind of surrounded. And so when my parents finally said, "Well, Dave, have you decided what school you want to apply for?" They didn't really know why, but I said, "I think I've decided on VCU." And that was totally because of Randy Carrington, who was a frat boy buddy of mine who bought a house right over there, actually. He still was here, and I knew that I could still go goof around with them on the weekends. And that really does have to be the dumbest reason ever for picking that school. But I think everything turned out fine, because as I got into school, I started learning things about myself and my art and creativity. And I remember pretty soon after I was living at home, which was a little bit of a drag, I ended up moving down into the Fan with some buddies that I met down there. And I remember I took foundation art class at VCU, which was required no matter what type of art you were going in, if you were going into sculpture or commercial art or painting. Everybody had to take a foundation. And I remember just several art professors that were meaningful to me. And there was this one guy called Salvador Federico. And I can remember being in his class, and I was a pretty confident draftsperson. So I could draw, and we were in figure drawing class. So the first day of that, we all knew that there was going to be, from what I remember, this gal kind of roaming around in a robe. And at some point, we were all a little bit nervous because at some point that robe was going to hit the floor. I was kind of like a little kid from Huguenot High, and I was wondering, oh my gosh, is this okay? I guess I like art school. So she took her pose, and under the direction of Salvador Federico, and so after the shock and awe of that, I began, and after drawing for 10 and 20 weeks from the model, you get used to it. And he was very strict about teaching us the proper way to draw and to view and to look and to record what we saw on paper. And I think it was called Nicolaides, the Proper Way to Draw. Yeah. I believe that was the title. Probably some of you in art school went through that same whole process of gesture drawing and line drawing. Anyway, Sal could tell that I knew how to draw, but I could tell he was not that pleased with what I was doing. And at one point he said, Dave, I want you to try an experiment today. And I said, okay. And he said, so this is what I want you to do. He said, to me, you seem to be relying too much on your facility. And I want you to test that and stress that. So he took my pencil and he got a 16-inch stick, and then he wrapped it around that. And he said, for the rest of the day, I want you to draw with this stick. And you got to hold the end like that. And so I had to figure out how to, transfer and translate my facility, which, when you're used to drawing like this and then all of a sudden you're drawing like this, it kind of gets it out of your control a little bit, and which was a good thing. And so I started to kind of discover different ways of making marks and different ways of recording what I was looking at, which was frustrating, but it was also a little bit exciting. And I said, well, that's really cool and it's different. And so that was my first challenge. And the second one was, take your right hand, I'm right-handed. He said, take your right hand and put it in your pocket. Now take that long stick in your left hand and draw it like that. So then that took it further away from any control that I had. And I can look back at that moment and I can remember that it sort of did something to me and just sort of showed me some possibilities that I hadn't really explored. I didn't really understand what he meant by facility. I went and looked it up, and this was the definition: the ability to do something well and easily, a natural aptitude, the absence of difficulty or effort. So, anyway, that was my takeaway from one of my favorite teachers, professors. Just opened up a different world, a different way of approaching drawing, approaching painting. The next section that I'm going to talk about is how I turned dumpster diving into $750 in 1974. How I turned dumpster diving into $750 in 1974, which in today's money is $5,226. So that was a lot of money. Students didn't really have anything necessarily to paint on except things like this or little stretchers. We didn't really get into building big stretchers, so I was always on the lookout at VCU for discarded canvases that other frustrated students tossed out. So this was at the Pollock building at VCU, and I walked by there, and I saw this big, giant, to me, stretcher that was thrown away and leaning on the dumpster, and I was very excited. It was the goofiest stretcher that you could imagine because it was like on canvas wrapped around a door of some variety and stapled. But anyway, it had canvas on it, so I took that, and it was really my first big painting. At that time, I was painting what I saw as a student, which was, I guess you wouldn't really call them bums today, but just like old guys hanging around the park at VCU. So I would sit out there and draw them all the time, and that I used them as my models. So I did this painting of this old guy sitting on the bench, and I would always like to throw in little unexpected weirdness in my paintings that didn't make great sense. So I put a balloon going up right beside him, which didn't make any sense. And then behind him, I had two other guys that were sitting on benches, but then I completely painted out the benches. So they were just kind of nestled down in the air. And that was the painting. Another odd thing about this painting is that whatever frustrated student had discarded it had painted these big circles. So there was like a imposter, I guess you would call it, underneath. So if you look at this painting, you can see these inexplicable circles. Anyway, very shortly after that, I heard there was an art show in Petersburg, and VCU didn't stress doing anything like that. They were much more avant-garde and, Virginia Museum related, so they wouldn't suggest us students going and doing a show, an outdoor art show. But anyway, I didn't care what they thought, and I said, oh, you can go show your work. Yeah, you can take it and show it. So I did that, entered that show. I didn't have any kind of booth to hang my work on, so I took some sticks and hit it down and took a clothesline like that and hung some artwork around that on the clothesline. Anyway, the judge walked around and looked at everybody, and in the end, it turned out that because of that stretcher that I found in the dumpster, I won Best in Show. Isn't that crazy? And the other odd thing about it is that painting was kind of meaningful to me, and so I've saved it all these years. And I'm wondering, this is my lovely daughter-in-law, Courtney, right there. Courtney, and Courtney, can you help me bring this painting over here? Because I have the painting right there. That's the back side of the Goofy stretcher right there. So see, it's very heavy. But Courtney's in really good shape, obviously. Let's hold it up just so you can see. So it's signed down there, 1974.
Look at that.
And it's signed in a signature that I no longer use. It's kind of a high school version of an artist's signature. But, I mean, you can see I was interested in kind of odd things that didn't really make any sense. And, I mean, you can kind of see benches under these guys, but that I took out. And there's that inexplicable balloon. Courtney, any more comments?
No, this is the first time I've seen this one.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Because it's so heavy that I haven't actually hung it on the wall. It's been. But anyway, we can take it right back over there.
Dave, I didn't see any circles. Where are the circles in that?
Oh, well, if you put it in a certain light,
Oh, these are light?
you can see big giant, like you can see a ridge there, and it's all under.
Yeah,
And
I
there's
see it now, yes. Okay. They're pretty well hidden.
right. So it was an idea that was discarded by that board.
It just catches.
It's acrylic.
What do VCU's teachers say of that?
Of this, I mean, I had a good experience at VCU in the end. That was right in the middle of abstract expressionism, and figurative painting was not high on the list of what they were teaching. We did learn the proper way to draw, but so some of them wondered what the heck is this guy doing, and some kind of could tell that I enjoyed painting the figure and encouraged it. But anyway, nobody at VCU cared that I won first place. Thank you. Could we encourage Courtney with a round of applause? By the way, that kid right there is one of my sons. I'd like to thank Jake for coming. So let me see. So when I got that $750, more like $5,000, I said, you know what? Because I was working and I was making $2.65 an hour. And I said, well, maybe there's possibilities on this art gig. So the very next week, I went out and bought a van, very junky, weird-looking lime green van. But I used that van throughout the next maybe 3 or 4 years, and I traveled and did a lot of art shows down through the Florida circuit, which probably a lot of you guys have done. I was able to get in some of the better shows, Coconut Grove, Winter Park, Las Olas, and so that's kind of how I made my living. I kind of gravitated, because what artist knows exactly what to paint, what kind of subject? I didn't really know, but I could tell that people were sort of attracted to musical related images. And so most of my paintings had sort of jazz club type roots. I ended up painting the interiors of jazz clubs and focusing on the people, interactions of the people with themselves or dancing or the musicians. And at the Petersburg show, here's just a quick aside about my preacher father, which I think is kind of funny. I enjoyed meeting people and selling artwork, so there was a guy at the Petersburg show who saw a particular painting that he liked, so I said, well, I could bring that over to your house and we could take a look and see what you think. And he said, okay. So I took it over there and haggled around with him and found out that he owned the Cadillac dealership there in Petersburg. So we haggled around a little bit. He made me an offer, which I would have taken, but I told him I wouldn't. Would he consider this? And just kind of, regular old stuff that we all do. So in the end, he did buy the painting. And when I was leaving, he said, Dave, if this art thing ever falls through and you're looking for a job, if you'd like to come work with me at the Cadillac dealership in sales, I would be glad to talk to you about that, which I thought was hilarious. So in going home that day, I recounted that story to my parents, and my dad, who was a very humorous guy, under the surface, he said, well, Dave, be sure to keep that guy's number. Didn't really put a lot of confidence, but he was just joking, of course. So what I did next was I heard about a program through the National Endowment of the Arts, and it was called Artist in Residence. And so I had some artist friends, and they said, you ought to try it for this thing. We hear there's a opening in York County. And so I did. I applied for that, and I went and interviewed in York County and ended up getting that position. It was a great thing for a young artist to do because they paid us like a teacher, but they gave us a studio, they required us to be in there at least 20 hours a week, and then 20 more hours in the different classrooms, and we kind of made up how we were gonna interject ourselves into the public school systems, individual classes. I had to give talks to, big groups of students, and maybe the second day that I went there, all of a sudden, they said, oh, you'll be talking to a group of students in the cafeteria. So I ended up saying, okay. And I walked in there and there was like 300 crazy students in this big cafeteria, everybody talking. And then here I come, carrying some paintings like that. And, whoever was in charge saying, okay, everyone, please listen up. This is our artist, and he's gonna talk to you a little bit. So I figured it out, and I just tried to keep things moving and keep it interesting, and it was a good challenge for me. I did a lot of talking to individual classes, and I'm going to do something right here. I started this out with elementary kids, which they loved, and then I said, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe junior high school kids would think this is funny, so I tried this with them, and that seemed to work out. So I'm going to do it with you guys just for the fun of it. I made up a name calling it The Mysterious Meandering Line. And I said, so I'm going to make some marks on here, and then somebody tell me what this is. And I would do a version of this. So I just go up to a big thing like this, and I would make some obscure lines like and then I'd say, okay. Reindeer? A bridge. The Grinch. All really, really good guesses, but all very far afield and incorrect. So then I would go back and And see how interested you all are? They're thinking, what in the heck is that guy doing? And I would get a couple of more guesses, and there was squunched up faces like some of you guys have. Any more guesses?
Treasure map.
A treasure map? Another incorrect guess, but really, really good.
It's a lady.
It's his face.
It's a lady with cleavage.
Yeah. What's her hat? A lady with a hat on.
Abstract.
Close.
Oh, right.
What was the guess, a lady?
Yeah.
The guess was a lady with a hat on. But when I would get a guess that was kind of close, I would go ahead and finish that one up.
What kind of messed me up was the cleavage.
Yes, I probably left that cleavage out with the, that was probably okay in junior high and above. Yes, I just did that for you.
Okay, thank you.
But that gave it away, didn't it?
Kind of.
So this is a lady with a bird's nest on her head and two little baby birds up there hollering their heads off. So I did lots of things like that. Here, we'll do one more real quick, okay? This one will be an easy one. This is the new one. Anyone? It makes me nervous when there's silence. So I have to fill in those voids with, all right, let's see. A what? Bingo. So.
I was going to guess a horse.
And fill in a little of that, and that's what it is. A giraffe. Who said giraffe over there?
All right, way to go. That's very, very perceptive.
You can have that. All right, let me see. Luckily, I bought my technical advisor, who would be Jake if something goes wrong, but we're still good. I credited 3 artists with having a pretty big impact on me and my view towards art and creativity and painting. 2 of them you probably are very familiar with, and one's a tiny bit more obscure, but one of them was Van Gogh. I loved his work. I loved how he was driven and painted daily. He, I think they said, never sold a painting his whole life, which I think his brother gave him money. That's what I was hoping would happen with me. If it came to that, but you know, my lawyer brother was very successful. But anyway, Van Gogh, I looked at a lot of his work and read a lot of things that he said, and one thing that, I'll just give you a couple of quotes from these artists, that he said was, "Put the paint on and let it sit. Don't keep brushing it, trying to make it pretty." And I love that when I kind of read that and started thinking about what that meant. I mean, I think we all struggle when we're painting, and sometimes when I'm painting, I'll say, well, you know what, I'm just kind of brushing that, trying to make it pretty. That's stupid. So paint that out and start over. I could tell exactly what he meant, because a lot of times the first things that you put in a painting are spontaneous and direct and have life in it. And if you have in your mind, well, I gotta make that look more like a giraffe or whatever, and you keep working on it, you lose that spark. So I could tell exactly what he meant by that. And I often think of that. One of the other artists is Picasso. Of course, everybody loves him, but I loved so many things about him. The furious manner and nature of how he painted daily, all the time, and sometimes he would paint 3, 4, 5 paintings a day. And I read a quote by him that I knew exactly what he meant. And he said this, he said, "It took me 21 years to learn to draw and paint like the masters. But it took me a lifetime to learn to draw like a child." So I knew exactly what he meant when I heard and read that that's what he said, because having worked with children, worked with the younger children up through high school, when you go into a class and you tell first graders, okay, everybody get some paper, okay, now everybody draw a cat. And then all of a sudden everybody's doing this. And then as you go into second grade and third grade, you say, okay, everybody get paper, and now everybody draw your house. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, they back off and they lose that gusto and that vision that a young child would have. And so Picasso continually wanted to rediscover, you know, the energy that young children can just jump into something. The other artist that I really liked was a guy called Rene Magritte, and many of you know him, British artist, and he was famous for like the bowler hatted man. He would have hats kind of floating around in the background, just unexplained recurrent images, which I was always drawn to. And he would never explain what his paintings meant. He thought that was ridiculous. And I read a quote by him when there was some interviewer that was pressing him on what this or that meant. And this is what he said. He said, "If you view a painting with the primary intention of discerning its meaning, you end up no longer responding to the painting itself. You're only interested in the questions that have been raised." Which that doesn't mean anything, really. I mean, kind of. I mean, it's the kind of answer that politicians give that are very unsatisfactory and you can't really repeat what he meant. But I like that you could do things, and I did that throughout my life of just putting weird things in paintings and not feeling the need to explain it, but just let the viewer have at it. So I painted throughout my life at that point, mostly musicians. Another thing I did was I did outdoor art shows. I did the Virginia Beach Boardwalk show. Oddly, don't ask me how, I won first place in painting, probably the second year that I did that. So felt like a hot shot. And I was taking down my booth at the end of the show, and I was back behind there undoing the things, and I heard a voice on the front of the booth, and the voice said something like this: "You mean that won first place?" So I thought that was kind of humorous, and I said, "Who the heck is saying that?" So anyway, I stood up on the railing behind the boardwalk, and I was confronted by really one of the most beautiful young women that I'd seen all summer. And it was a gal. She was on her bicycle, and she just stopped by, and she was just looking and talking out loud. And so I stood up back there and I said, "What the heck?" So I was hoping that I could, maybe carry the relationship a little further, maybe. So, but she was on a bike and she was like leaning, and so I boldly said, "Hey, could you give me a hand folding up this tarp?" I saw a tarp that I'd put over there. I said, "I just need help doing that. Would that be a possibility?" And she looked at it and she said, "Okay." So discarded the bike, went over there, folded up the tarp, and just kept the banter rolling. And oddly, in my art travels, that young lady I ended up marrying 7 months later, and all from the Virginia Beach Boardwalk show. And that's my lovely wife, Cheryl, who's right over there. Cheryl didn't want to come today because she was too nervous for me. She said, "Are you sure you know what you're going to say?" Anyway, the art world has been very good for me. So we've been together 40 years or something. How many? 43 years. I think that's pretty good. Lou Gay would have never thought I was that stable of a person. You mean that's Dave Cochran in that band? 32 years? Anyway, Cheryl, thank you for coming. This happened to me, it was unexpected, but it changed the course of how I painted for the next 35 or 45 years. So I had done big paintings. I understood that wealthy people have big walls, and so they actually need big paintings. So I did large jazz club paintings, and they sold very well. So I had a wealthy guy from McLean, Virginia, and he was in my studio and talking about possibly doing a commission. And he just kind of as an aside said, "Hey Dave, is there any way you can get me in that painting?" And I never really loved portraiture, but I could do it, but I didn't really like it. I'd rather make up faces. But I said, because basically I'm sort of a capitalist pig, I said, "Well, yeah, I mean, we could maybe make you play the saxophone." And he says, "Oh, I love that, yes, do that." And then he said, "How about my wife? Could you get her in there sometime?" And my brain was spinning around saying, well, because I appreciated his prior response, I said, "Well, how about we make her the singer?" And he, "Oh, I love that, yeah, do that." And so I said, "Well, do you have any photos? And, let me just get some photos of you, and then I'll go ahead and do that." He said, "Yes, do that." So for the next month or 6 weeks in my studio, I created this painting, and I had a studio at a place called the Torpedo Factory. Yeah. Many of you, probably most of you, have maybe been there, and it was a little part that, because my phone skipped something, I forgot to mention that I moved up after my wife and I got married to Alexandria, and I got into the Torpedo Factory. So I had a studio there, and people would come in and out and watch, and so they saw me painting this. Different people would ask various things about it. Oh, well, this is actually a kind of a casual portrait of this guy. Oh, yeah, that was kind of cool. So all of a sudden, I understood that there was a little unfulfilled niche in art that wealthy people sort of appreciated portraits, but nobody liked the rigid formal portraits anymore. And so I started developing that direction, and I even started taking out ads because the response was really pretty steady and pretty amazing. And I took out ads in kind of high-class magazines up in the Northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland area. I would take out full-page ads, and up at the top it would say, "A different kind of family portrait." And I have one. Not being up in Northern Virginia anymore, now you may see my ads in Richmond Magazine. So I probably for the next 20 years, I found a particular magazine that went to all the ritzy houses up there called Home and Design. And I would have a full page ad. And so when you see an ad like this, that you can say, hey, that's that guy that came and talked to us that day. Because I still do take these ads, and I went against what all my other artist friends were suggesting. They were saying, just put a painting, don't put a lot of words, nobody's gonna read that. Because when they saw what I was thinking about, they said, nah, it's just not gonna work. But what I ended up doing was different kind of family portrait. Then I had a little story here of how the people met me, all the while in this little story relaying information on how they can get in touch with me if they wanted to. And then I would show the photos. I would use casual photos that the people would like of themselves. I'd never had live sittings, but I could get those photos, and then I figured out how to put them together and create a painting like that. So from that one afternoon where that guy asked me that, it sort of kind of changed the direction of what I was doing, and more I started, being, oh, that guy that does the portraits. And this section is called, "Is Painting Portraits Kind of a Cop-Out for an Artist?" Is painting portraits sort of a cop-out? So at the Torpedo Factory, which has 180 full-time artists, we sit around and talk all the time. It's actually a question that comes up quite frequently, and you guys probably talk about the same sort of thing. We all have things that we like to paint, but then we also have things that seem to sell on the open market for some reason, and that kind of pushes us in that direction. But then we also like doing, cats on picnic tables. That's our favorite stuff, but people like to see your flowers, with bees on them. So we're pulled in different ways. And so is it a cop-out to change what you do and do portraits? It's something that I struggled with for a little, maybe 10 minutes, but because as I say, deep down I'm sort of a capitalist pig, but that's because when you're an artist trying to make a living only on your art, and you have a lovely wife, and you have 3 kids all of a sudden, and you have lots of bills, and you have a house, and you have to figure out, either take a job, at Sheets, or at the Cadillac place, and paint on the side, or try to figure out how to do something with your artwork that can actually help you make a living. So how I view it and kind of justify it, which probably not the right word, is that I look back in art history, and almost every single famous painter that I could come up with that I admired that were figurative paintings also painted portraits. They painted portraits of their wealthy patrons, and they also did, like Van Gogh and Degas would go paint in bars and they paint what they want to, but then they would also paint the wealthy patrons that actually gave them money. So that's kind of how I, justify being sort of a portrait artist while also being, you'll see some of these other paintings around, like that young lady carrying a jukebox over there. That's not a portrait, that's just something that I envisioned, and I put odd things, like you'll see there's a turtle, and then for some reason there's a frog going the other way, trying to relate to the turtle to turn around, but it's not working. And then I have a couple of guys playing saxophones in the background, and that's the kind of stuff I like to paint. It still is saleable, but I certainly make most of my money off of the portraits, right, Cheryl? She keeps all the books, so she knows. Let me see, what time is it? I've been talking, am I talking too much, Cheryl? Yes. 1:45. I sell a lot of paintings to wealthy people, and so here's a couple of little anecdotes that I've come across, and things that have been noteworthy to me. This one's called A Brew and Musings of a Billionaire. A brew and musings of a billionaire. So I did this family portrait of a very, very wealthy guy. And he loved the process. I painted his family. I always, of course, make my subjects look, don't tell, but a little bit better than they actually look. But don't tell them that. Just kidding. So he loved how I depicted his family and himself and his wife. And so I went over to his house, big giant house out in Great Falls, hung the painting, and so we were sitting back and having a drink after I hung it just before I left, and he kind of was just talking out loud, and he says, Dave, looking back and looking at this painting now and looking at my life, he says, obviously I have great wealth, but I also know that probably within 2 generations, that's going to disappear. It'll all be gone. I got lots of kids. It'll all get split up, and that will be gone. But what I know is that this painting, somewhere in 100 years, possibly 200 years, will be hanging in the home of some future relative of mine. And he said, that's oddly, important to me. And I kind of understood what wealthy people think about their legacy when I kind of listen to him talk about that, because they want to make a difference, they want to be remembered. Different ones do it in different ways, donating money to this and that and have their name here and there, but I would prefer that they would buy one of my paintings, pass on that legacy that way. Okay, here's one quick little anecdote. I painted this guy, kind of a hotshot, wealthy guy, him and his family, his most attractive wife and kids, and so they loved it, and got paid, and so then I got a phone call about 3 years later from sort of a, frantic guy, and he says, hey Dave, this is Joe Schmo, remember me from Great Falls? And he says, that painting that you did? And I'm wondering, where is he going with this? Does he want another painting? Of course not. He said, listen, I got big problems here. He says, I love your painting, but it seems like that there had been trouble in paradise, and that in the interim, since I had painted his family, him and his wife's relationship had met and untimely demise. So he says, and I do have a new wife now, but she won't let this painting anywhere near my house. And so, and I'm thinking, okay, and that's my problem because. And he said, so what I'm wondering is this, he says, and my wife thought this was the cringiest thing ever. He says, I'm wondering if you could keep that painting and just paint out my former wife's face and paint in my new wife. And he said, if I got you to do that and you agreed to do it, how much would that cost? And so, because it seemed like, rightly and justifiably, half of his great wealth had gone off to McLean with his former. So I guess he wasn't in quite as good of a shape as he was. So I said, well, because I'm a capitalist pig, I could do that, and that would be right around $1,000, and which is pretty reasonable. But he says, well, how about this, Dave? He says, my former wife and my present wife look very similar. He said, what about if you didn't change her body and just painted the face on there? Would that be any less?
Oh my God.
So I, of course, being a capitalist pig, said, yeah, sure, I can do that. Let's say $900. So that's exactly what I did, and everybody who knows seemed happy, and I never heard back from him about a third wife, so. But I would have probably done it. So if you're a painter and you paint daily and you're getting tired of what you're doing and you think you're just, like we all do, copying our former successes and, oh, well, there's another one of those flower paintings, it's beautiful, but yeah, I've done it or you've done it all before. And what can you do to kind of shock yourself into doing something different? I heard Torpedo Factory artists talk about this, that you need to agitate, amuse, bemuse, shock, and startle your artistic sensitivities in some way and do something different. And that all of a sudden gets a surge of that artistic drive that we all used to have. And so I was going through that maybe 6 weeks ago, finished a giant portrait, got paid, of course felt like a fat cat, didn't really have to do any painting, but kind of wanted to. And my wife Cheryl said, well, why don't you do something like this? Instead of painting on a white canvas, why don't you paint the entire thing black and then approach it that way? And so something I had never really done kind of versions of that because we build up paint and get dark in the background and then paint on top of it, but I'd never really started out like with black gesso, if there is such a thing. So I went down and painted 3 canvases black, and I think they turned out really cool. I'm going to show you, aren't you excited, some of the first to see this series. And actually, I have a studio at Crossroads. Probably most of you have been there. And they have a bi-monthly juried exhibit, which I would suggest all of you should enter because you don't have to be a member there. It only costs $15 and you get juried, and if you get in, thousands of people see your work. So I entered one of these and surprise, surprise, got accepted. So when you go to Crossroads opening in a couple of weeks, you'll see my painting there. Isn't that exciting? Mm-hmm. All right, let me... So here is, Courtney, can you hold up this side of this? So this is what I ended up doing. all painted black. You get lighter tones and build it up that way. So it's still some of, I'm going back to the, thank you, Jake. So going back to the old roots of music-related paintings. I mean, at this stage in my life, we can kind of do what we want to do. I still love music. I play a lot of music. By the way, Jake is a musician in a band called Illiterate Light. A full-time musician, and they're headlining at River Rocks Festival this summer. And they just played it. Who knows where Red Rocks is? I mean, it's a huge place. There was like 6,000 or 7,000 people. It's a two-man band. He's the drummer, so look him up and go see him at River Rocks. Is that okay, Jake? That's great, Dad. Okay. What was I saying? Going back to my musical roots, but then I always throw in vague oddities like that odd, wise owl peeking in up there trying to figure out what is going on. Yes, and I'm also like doing some drawing into the painting, so not just paint. I think in the end I'm better at graphics and drawing than I am at painting. Really, I've always tried to, my life, catch up one to the other. But so I try doing drawing in my paintings as well. So anyway, that's one of them. Courtney,
Oh, yeah, that's true.
thank you, Courtney. She didn't mean to knock that over. Courtney did not mean to knock that over, but luckily it wasn't under glass, Courtney, so you're all right. Here is another one in that series. Just some vague color in there, and I used, thank you, Jake. I used gold paint straight out of the tube. I think it's good to experiment and apply paint in different ways and just have ideas and have at it. So anyway, that's another one. And this one, also I added a few odd things like abandoned shoes. That who knows, has anybody ever thrown shoes up on the stage at you, Jake?
Not that I can remember.
I don't know where I got that idea from, but anyway, that's another one. Just kind of showing you. Anyway, we're running close to out of time, and wondered if anyone, I've only gone through a third of my notes. If anybody have any questions at all?
Yeah, why don't you come back for part 2?
Have you ever tried an abstract? Have you ever done?
Actually, when I was in school, in some of my painting classes, at the pressure and suggestion of some of my better professors, they said, why don't you just try abstract, which was a great thing to do, and I did that some back then. I still have a lot of abstract elements in my paintings, dealing with color and layers and how colors go into each other. And so every once in a while, I will try some abstract paintings that my wife, whose opinion I trust, thinks are probably not that successful. And so I end up using them as backgrounds to paint musicians and abandoned shoes. Anybody else have any? Yes?
Yeah, I just want to say that I've calculated your back dues. It's $500, but in today's dollars, that's $3,200. So as to the question as to whether you have to pay, the answer is yes.
I mean, my answer would be that I have nothing to do with paying the finances, and if you can talk into cutting a check for that, good luck. I'm doubtful of that. Yeah, yes.
I'm curious if you painted your own family in a big portrait.
I don't know if other portrait painters have the same issue that I have, but I've painted several times, I would call them very unsuccessful paintings of my family. I mean, I thought they were sort of successful, but, it's just really tough. I don't think I can do it very well. I would, let somebody else paint them, but, yeah, I tried, but I failed miserably. Yes?
So when you put your oddities into your paintings, are they symbolic or something, or just messing with people?
I'm just messing with you. Well, I mean, if you approach a painting with a primary concern of discerning its meaning, then you end up no longer responding to the painting itself. You're only kind of approaching the questions that have been raised. Next question. I mean, as an answer to that, I think putting in unexplained elements just adds a bit of mystery to the painting. Different people interpret it in different ways depending upon their own lives and experiences. And so different people can look at the same painting and tell me that they get this and that out of it, and I always agree with them. Like, oh, that's kind of what I was going for. But, I mean, I think that's the way I view it, is that different people see different things in the same painting, and that's great. Yes?
I still want to know where the tree trunk up on the front is. You said everybody was going to find out. That I would find out when I saw it.
Okay, yeah. This was, okay, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Right, I forgot about this. So this is something I would usually take to every single class that I would go to, and usually when I used to have art talks, I would take this and I would hold this up, and I would say, can anybody tell me what this is?
Hornet's nest.
Hornet's nest?
Leftover paint.
A volcano?
Leftover paint. Used paint. In a bucket.
No. This is a paper plate. So that would be my answer. And somebody kind of gleaned what it was, but this is actually a very odd and unusual and atypical or not typical palette. So some artists, they clean off their palette every single time, get it crystal clean, and so they can see actually what colors they have on there. None of that matters to me because I put it on the top there so I can vaguely tell what's dry and what's not, and then I mix it up in there. And the reason that I came to like painting on this, here, can you stand up and hold this? So it weighs maybe 18 pounds, something like that. And the reason I like that is because when I am painting, and I put little dots of paint up here, and I'm mixing my paints, if I have just a regular, normal palette, like this, and I'm mixing the paint, and then the whole palette goes like this. And that is so irritating. There's not many things that irritate me, but going like this and then not doing what I want. So that's so irritating. But I found at the torpedo factory that I put little dots of paint on here every day, and incrementally it grows like this. So this is maybe 7 years of paint.
So you were right.
And, I mean, the good thing about this is that it grows incrementally. So sometimes my wife will come down and actually measure to see if it has risen any, to see if I've been goofing around or watching tennis or whatever and not really working. But yes, actually it does. This is all paint. Here's one other, oh good. Here's one other interesting thing.
Is it all acrylic?
Yes, all acrylic. When I paint around there, it forms a little ridge which makes it look like a volcano, and then it's not flat, so it's not very functional. So what I do, and my daughters-in-laws all really love it when I do this, is I take a razor blade and I cut off the top in an attempt to make it flat so my paint will stay right there. But what that produces is a weird and oddly shaped, multicolored thing like this. And so all my daughters-in-laws love getting these and making jewelry out of it when they go and to fancy parties and things. I'll give them a stack of cards, and when their wealthy friends inquire, like, "Oh, your jewelry is so beautiful," and, "Oh, that's my father-in-law. He's an artist. Here's his card." But none of that's really true, but sort of. I always thought that would make. Yeah. So, anyway. Yes, question.
Well, I got two questions. One is about this palette thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you saying that you're getting to a more limited palette? Because it's smaller at the top than at the bottom. Or what?
This is a continual concern of mine. Because
gonna
as you
happen?
can tell, through the years, it does
Yeah.
get smaller and smaller. And if I just let it keep going, it would get up here like this, and then my palette would be that big, which would be very unsatisfactory. So as you can tell, when I leave some of my paint with the top off and it dries up and it's no longer functional, you can see, oh, here's an idea, I can go around there. So I went around the outside edge in an attempt to flare it out so I would have more space on the top of my palette.
And my second question is, could you show on that painting, either one of those paintings, what you were talking about when you said that you added drawing to it?
Well, I mean, you can see, like in his hat.
Okay, so did
So-
you do that with
So they have different,
Posca pen or something?
well, they have different acrylic pens
Okay.
that I've gotten that's sort of new, so I can use those.
Okay.
Some of them have a variation in tip, so that, because I like that, so the line would be varied. Or you can just do it with a paintbrush.
Okay.
That's what I tell, young art students, to learn to draw with a paintbrush. Don't like draw in your sketchbook and you're all loose and doing great fun things, and then put a paintbrush in your hand and you freeze up and you think, oh, now I gotta figure out, and all of a sudden you tighten up. So just learn, I tell them, to draw with your paintbrush,
Okay.
which is what I do.
Why did you choose acrylics?
I mean, it's another quick story. At VCU, I think I learned probably as much by painting in open studios at night than I did going and listening to a professor and painting and listening to him talk about your artwork. I would go when I was there at night. They had open studios, and me and probably 20 other artists would go in there and paint. And I was painting in oil at the time. Oil and me don't mix. For a lot of reasons, because I'm messy. I paint direct and fast. Oil paint is really expensive. Plus you put it on thick, and then what do you do with that canvas? You can't really carry it home. You gotta let it sit for 2 weeks. And so none of it. So I tried an acrylic, but that looked to me at that time kind of plastic and just so different. It didn't look rich. But there was a guy painting next to me, and I watched him painting, and he was painting in acrylic, but he was using this stuff at the time. It was called Roplex. And I asked him what he was doing and watched him applying his paint to the canvas, and it was completely different than what I was doing. And so what it was an acrylic medium. It looks like I'm not going to be producing a great painting today because I talk too much. But now the closest thing to Roplex, Golden makes it, and it's called GAC 100. Some of you probably use it anyway, but in my studio, next to my paints, I have a used yogurt cup. And then I put GAC 100 in there, and pretty much all the time I'll be dipping my brush into that and mixing it with the acrylic paint. And it just does different things with acrylics. It puts a glaze on, but it holds the brush marks in a way that just water mixed with acrylic does not do. And so you can do glazing on top of things, and I could point out if you wanted to later the things that, like in the background there, the white, you can build it up in the window. You can just put layers and you can see through it. And anyway, you might want to give that a try if you're an acrylic painter. GAC 100. Yeah, GAC 100, made by Golden.
Golden, I like
Yeah, and it's white, but it dries clear. So I guess that is, unless somebody has, I had so many other good stories, but I'm just kidding. Yes.
Is that what you meant when you said that you put the golden on directly from the tube?
Yeah.
That you didn't use the GAC in it? Is that what
No,
you
that's just directly, that's just going like this.
So what made you say that you did it directly from the tube? Do you not do that directly from the tube? Like
No, I mean, I just take a tube like that. It doesn't matter to me what kind of acrylic paint you use. I just get anything at yard sales or thrown away or have to go buy new when I have to. And so you can mix it all up, it doesn't matter. But like on the saxophone there, I would just remove that top and then just squeeze it and just kind of go like, thank you, Jake. Yeah, and just kind of go like this and use it as a drawing tool. And so you can go like this, and then you let it dry for 5 minutes. The good thing about acrylic, then you can kind of smudge it like that if you want. Go back on top, smudge it like that. Take the wrong end of the paintbrush and do drawings on it. And then, like there's some drawing there with a acrylic pen, and anyway.
Acrylic pen.
Yeah.
Like Posco?
Don't know?
You don't care?
No,
Okay.
don't care. I guess that is all that I have to say now. I thought I was going to run out of stuff to say.